For 3 weeks he's been living on the streets. Everyone thinks he's crazy. In reality, he's a federal judge discovering just how broken his own justice system really is. Welcome to People's Journal Stories. Before we begin this shocking story of hidden identity, systemic corruption, and one man's quest for truth, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us expose the truth. Judge Marcus Hartwell had presided over the federal courthouse for 12 years, handing down sentences from his elevated bench in crisp robes while defendants stood before him in orange jumpsuits. He thought he understood the system. He thought he understood justice. He was wrong. It started 3 months ago when a case came before his court that shattered everything he believed about fairness and equality under the law. A homeless veteran named Daniel Rodriguez had been arrested for sleeping in a public park. The prosecution sought the maximum sentence, 6 months in county jail, despite it being Daniel's first offense. The defense attorney, clearly overworked and underprepared, spent exactly 4 minutes presenting Daniel's case. No mention of his military service, his struggle with PTSD, or the fact that he'd been waiting 8 months for veteran housing assistance. Just a quick plea for leniency that fell on deaf ears. Marcus watched this travesty of justice unfold in his own courtroom and realized something horrifying. This wasn't unusual. This was routine. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He would step down from the bench temporarily, citing personal reasons, and discover firsthand how the justice system treated those it was supposed to protect. 3 weeks later, Marcus Hartwell ceased to exist. In his place stood a man the world would know only as Mike, unwashed, unshaven, carrying everything he owned in a torn backpack. The transformation was more complete than Marcus had imagined possible. Without his judicial robes, his expensive suits, his position of authority, he became utterly invisible to the same system he had served for over a decade. His first night on the streets taught him lessons no law school could provide. Sleep was impossible, not just because of the cold concrete, but because of the constant fear. Police patrols passed every hour, their flashlights scanning for anyone who dared to seek shelter. "Move along," Officer Bradley Kowalski commanded, shining his light directly into Marcus's eyes. "No sleeping here." Marcus sat up slowly, his back already aching from the hard ground. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem," Kowalski replied. "Find somewhere else or I'll run you in for loitering." This was the same Officer Kowalski who had appeared in Marcus's courtroom dozens of times, always respectful, always addressing him as "Your Honor." Now, without the robes and elevated bench, Marcus was just another piece of human debris to be swept away. The shelters were full, a waiting list 3 months long for a bed that might be available for one night. The social services offices required documents that Marcus, in his new identity, didn't possess. Every door that was supposed to help the homeless was locked tight with bureaucratic red tape. On his 5th day, Marcus was arrested. The charge was trespassing. He had sought shelter under an overpass during a rainstorm on what turned out to be private property. The arresting officers were rough, dismissive, treating him like he was less than human. "Another junkie," one muttered as they pushed Marcus into the back of the patrol car. Marcus had never used drugs in his life, but his appearance after 5 days on the streets told a different story. Dirty clothes, unwashed hair, the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. He fit the profile they expected. The holding cell was a nightmare Marcus had never imagined. 12 men crammed into a space designed for 6, with one toilet that barely functioned, and the overwhelming smell of unwashed bodies and despair. His cellmates were a mixture of the mentally ill, the addicted, and the simply unfortunate. There was Tommy, a veteran with untreated schizophrenia who talked to voices only he could hear. There was Carlos, a day laborer who'd been arrested for public intoxication after drinking because he couldn't afford food. There was Jerome, 19 years old, arrested for stealing a sandwich from a convenience store. "First time?" asked Robert, an older man with kind eyes who seemed to be looking out for the others. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "Lawyer," Robert continued. I can't afford one. Robert laughed bitterly. None of us can. You'll get assigned a public defender who'll meet you for about 3 minutes before they tell you to plead guilty. System's not designed for people like us. Marcus watched the parade of injustice unfold over the next 48 hours. Public defenders who were clearly overwhelmed, processing cases like assembly line workers, prosecutors seeking maximum sentences for minor infractions, judges, his former colleagues, who seemed to view the defendants as problems to be disposed of rather than human beings deserving of justice. When Marcus's turn came, he stood before Judge Patricia Reeves, a woman he had worked alongside for years. She looked at him with the same cold indifference she showed all homeless defendants. Marcus Hartwell, she read from the file, not recognizing the man standing before her. Trespassing. How do you plead? For a moment, Marcus considered revealing his identity, but he realized that would defeat the purpose of what he was learning. Instead, he said quietly, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Judge Reeves barely looked up. Trial date set for 6 weeks from today. Bail is set at $500. $500 might as well have been $5 million for someone living on the streets. Marcus was remanded back to custody. 6 weeks in county jail opened Marcus's eyes to horrors he had been blind to throughout his judicial career. Men with serious mental illnesses received no treatment. Drug addicts went through withdrawal without medical supervision. People charged with minor offenses sat in jail for months because they couldn't make bail, losing their jobs, their homes, their families while waiting for their day in court. Marcus befriended a young man named Kevin who had been arrested for shoplifting baby formula. His infant daughter was hungry, and he couldn't afford food after paying rent. Kevin had been in jail for 2 months awaiting trial, while his baby was in foster care, and his girlfriend struggled alone. "System's rigged," Kevin said during one of their late-night conversations. "If you got money, you walk. If you don't, you rot." Marcus began documenting everything he witnessed: the guards who used excessive force, the medical staff who ignored serious health problems, the way mental illness was criminalized instead of treated, the cycle of poverty that ensured people would return to jail again and again. When his trial date finally arrived, Marcus stood before Judge Reeves again. His public defender, Sarah Chen, had spent exactly 7 minutes reviewing his case. "Your Honor," Sarah began mechanically, "my client was seeking shelter from the rain. He had no intention of trespassing and poses no threat to society." Prosecutor James Martinez stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant has been living as a vagrant for months. This isn't about seeking shelter. It's about choosing a criminal lifestyle. I recommend 60 days in county jail to send a message." Marcus listened to them debate his fate as if he weren't even human. Judge Reeves looked bored, clearly eager to move on to the next case in her overloaded docket. 60 days seems excessive," she said finally. 30 days, suspended sentence with time served, community service, and mandatory drug counseling. Marcus had never used drugs, but the system had decided he must be an addict based solely on his appearance. He accepted the sentence silently, knowing that protesting would only make things worse. 2 days after his release, Marcus walked into the federal courthouse where he'd presided for 12 years. The security guards didn't recognize him in his disheveled state and nearly prevented him from entering the building. "I have business here," he told the guard firmly. "Yeah, right," the guard replied. "What kind of business?" Marcus pulled out his federal ID, still valid despite his leave of absence. The guard's expression changed from suspicion to shock to embarrassment in the span of seconds. Marcus made his way to his chambers, where his law clerk, Jennifer Walsh, nearly called security when she saw him. "Judge Hartwell?" she said uncertainly. We didn't know when you'd be back." Marcus sat heavily in his leather chair, the contrast between this comfort and the concrete floors he'd been sleeping on stark and overwhelming. "Jennifer, I need you to prepare something for me, a report about systematic failures in our justice system." Over the next week, Marcus compiled everything he had witnessed: names, dates, specific instances of constitutional violations. He documented how poverty was criminalized, how mental illness was punished instead of treated, how the presumption of innocence was reversed for those who couldn't afford to defend themselves. The report was devastating. It detailed a justice system that had become a machine for warehousing the poor and disadvantaged, while the wealthy could literally buy their way out of consequences. Marcus knew that releasing the report would end his career. Judges weren't supposed to criticize the system from the inside, but he also knew that his conscience wouldn't let him return to business as usual. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Chief Judge Harold Morrison, a man who had been his mentor and friend for over a decade. When Marcus walked into Morrison's office, the chief judge barely recognized him. "My God, Marcus, what happened to you?" Morrison said, rising from his desk. "You look like you've been living on the streets." "I have been," Marcus replied calmly, "for 2 months." Morrison stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. You're a federal judge. You can't just—" "I can, and I did." Marcus placed his report on Morrison's desk. "This is what I found." For the next hour, Marcus detailed his experiences: the arbitrary enforcement of laws based on appearance, the systematic denial of constitutional rights to those who couldn't afford to defend them, the way homelessness itself had been criminalized while the underlying causes remained unaddressed. Morrison read portions of the report, his face growing pale. "Marcus, you can't release this. It would destroy public confidence in the judicial system." "Maybe it should," Marcus replied. "A system that operates this way doesn't deserve public confidence. Think about your career, your reputation. You'll never work in law again if you release this." Marcus looked out the window at the city below, where men and women like Tommy and Carlos and Jerome struggled to survive in a system that saw them as problems to be managed rather than human beings to be helped. "Some things are more important than careers, Harold." That evening, Marcus stood before his bathroom mirror for the first time in 2 months. The man looking back at him was different from the one who had left. Leaner, harder, but somehow more alive. The expensive suit felt foreign after weeks in donated clothes. His phone rang. It was Jennifer, his law clerk. "Judge, the media is asking questions. Someone leaked that you're preparing a report on the justice system. What should I tell them?" Marcus thought about Kevin, still in jail because he couldn't afford baby formula. About Tommy, whose mental illness was treated as a crime. About Daniel Rodriguez, the veteran whose case had started this journey. Tell them the truth will be revealed tomorrow. The next morning, Marcus held a press conference. He stood at the podium not in his judicial robes, but in the simple clothes he had worn on the streets. Behind him was a projection of his report's title, "Justice Denied, a Federal Judge's Investigation into Systematic Poverty Discrimination in American Courts." "For 2 months," he began, "I lived as the defendants in my courtroom live. I experienced firsthand how our justice system treats those who cannot afford to defend themselves. What I found was a system that has forgotten its most basic principle: equal justice under law." The room erupted with questions, but Marcus continued calmly. "I am releasing a comprehensive report documenting constitutional violations that occurred daily in our courts. I am also announcing my resignation from the federal bench, effective immediately." A reporter called out, "Judge Hartwell, why give up your career for this?" Marcus looked directly into the cameras. "Because I swore an oath to uphold justice, not to perpetuate injustice. That oath doesn't end when I leave the courthouse." 6 months later, Marcus Hartwell opened the Hartwell Center for Justice Reform in a converted warehouse downtown. The center provided legal aid to homeless individuals, advocated for criminal justice reform, and trained law enforcement in constitutional policing. Kevin was among the center's first clients. With proper legal representation, his charges were dismissed, and he was reunited with his daughter. Tommy received the mental health treatment he needed instead of jail time. Daniel Rodriguez, the veteran whose case had started everything, became an advocate for homeless veterans' rights. The federal courthouse still stood imposing and grand, but now it operated under new oversight procedures. Marcus's report had triggered congressional hearings, judicial reforms, and a national conversation about equal justice. Marcus never regretted his decision. He had learned that true justice isn't dispensed from an elevated bench by someone in robes. It's found in the willingness to stand with those who have no voice and speak truth to power. Some people change the system by working within it. Others change it by refusing to be part of it when it's broken. Marcus Hartwell chose the harder path, but in doing so, he became more than a judge. He became an agent of true justice. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered what you would do if you had the power to expose it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about the moments when you chose to stand up for what's right, even when it was difficult. Because here at People's Journal Stories, we believe that real heroes aren't those who maintain broken systems. They're those who have the courage to break them down and build something better. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us spread stories that show how one person's courage can transform an entire system. And remember, justice isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together, one choice at a time.